So as I mustered up enough energy to stay conscious, I called my daughters over and I said, hey, ladies, this is what's going to happen. Mom's not feeling well, and some doctors are going to come to the house to make sure I'm okay. So when you see people come into the house, it's just these doctors that are going to help me make sure that I'm okay. And I told them both I love them. And in that moment, I wondered if I had told my daughters that I love them for the last time. You're listening to episode 296 of the Building Psychological Strength podcast, where we uncover the information, tools, and techniques to turn our mind into our most valuable asset.
The courage to face fears with persistence.
Being able to be present enough in this moment to choose my response thoughtfully.
We have the strength to bend to life stressors, to bend to adversity without snapping, without breaking.
There are only 6 things that contribute to our quality of life, and they are all experiences.
In every moment, we are deciding who we want to be and how we want to live our lives.
Noticing what your brain is doing and then being able to make choices.
Mobilize the things that we know lift us up.
Fear is not logical. It's primal.
Hello, happy Wednesday, and welcome back to the Building Psychological Strength podcast. My name is April Seifert, and I'm your host. You know, so many times we talk about building psych strength, and it is a topic that gets misconstrued because people think things like gratitude practices and some of the work that we do and the techniques that we talk about on this podcast are akin to pretending like there's no hardship or no adversity in the world. You know, we've done past episodes on the difference between a gratitude practice and toxic positivity. Toxic positivity meaning a situation where we deny the fact that adverse, difficult, challenging things will happen in life. We put our rose-colored glasses on and we pretend like everything's okay when it's not. We ignore our difficult emotions and we move on as though there's something wrong with experiencing hardship in life, when in fact it's a fact of life. Where psychological strength really comes into play is when the chips are down, when it's really tough, when life hands you adversity, or worse, when you're in a crisis situation. Psychological strength is something that we practice and we work on and we develop in our day-to-day lives so that we are strong and we have skills and capabilities when we need them. I'm going to give a quick analogy and then I'm going to talk about why I'm diving in this way. The analogy I want to give is basketball. We've given this before on the podcast. Let's say that you are a professional basketball player and you want to, do well in the upcoming NBA championships, right? Let's say that that's your goal. You're not going to practice free throws for the first time during the NBA championships. You're not going to perform very well if that's where you're getting your practice. Instead, you're going to set up the opportunity for you to practice free throw after free throw after free throw outside of the context of when it really matters. You're going to practice these techniques in order to create the muscle memory you need so that when you're in a high stress situation like the NBA championships, when you're in a situation when it really matters, when your performance needs to be on point, you can rely on that muscle memory, on the strength and the skill that you developed outside of that during practice. You can rely on it and show up and perform in a way that gets you through that situation effectively. I give that example because in our lives, so many times it seems like it's not worth it to practice mindfulness, practice gratitude, practice having an observing, separate relationship with our thoughts, practice emotional intelligence and emotion labeling and all these other things that we talk about on the podcast. There's so many, and we'll dive into a bunch during this episode. So many times we think that work just isn't important in our day-to-day lives. But I want to tell you that when you encounter adversity, when life hands you a crisis, what is the most incredibly valuable gift is the ability to rely on that practice, to rely on the skills and the abilities that you've developed outside of that crisis situation in order to move through it and thrive and do well. Today's episode is very personal. I want to share a crisis situation that recently happened to me, and I want to talk about the elements of psychological strength that came into play both during the crisis and in the days and weeks after. This is not going to be an easy episode for me to put together. I am very likely going to choke up at a number of points in this episode, so just be ready for it. And just know that if you are in a position where you might be triggered by health-related issues, that's what we're going to be talking about during this episode. Regardless, I would really hope that all of you who are here stick around. We'll talk a little bit about what happened in this situation, but then I want to unpack it. I want to make it relevant for you. I want to talk about why you should keep coming back to this podcast and others, and why you should continue to work on these skills for yourself, because they're absolutely critical. Okay, so first let's talk about the situation that happened. I am just to give you some context, I'm a fairly healthy individual. Many of you know that I have multiple sclerosis, that I have lived with that for 25 years of my life. But other than that, I'm extremely healthy. I work out 4-ish times a week. My diet's pretty good. I sleep exceptionally well. I keep myself hydrated. All of the care and feeding that you would basically give a houseplant, which is what our bodies need, I try to do for myself because it's important to me and it's something that I value. And I give that context because I want to avoid a situation where you hear what happened to me and we immediately try to psychologically distance ourselves and say, oh, that could never happen to me. I want to immediately bat away, oh, maybe she wasn't taking care of herself. Maybe, she, whatever it was. These crisis situations can happen to anybody. And this one came out of the blue for me. My husband was working a shift in the emergency department, which meant that I was home by myself with my 2 very young kids, 2 girls under the age of 6. We were home, we were having fun, we had made dinner and ate it outside because it was a beautiful day. We were playing outside and it came time to bring our dishes and everything back inside and start cleaning up for the evening. We brought our dishes in, and I noticed as I got to the kitchen that I was feeling really dizzy. And I couldn't attribute it to anything because I had just had a giant glass of water outside, so I didn't think I was dehydrated. I hadn't had like a beer or a glass of wine or anything like that day, and I couldn't blame it on that. I mean, there was really no explainable reason why I should feel dizzy. And P.S., my MS doesn't do acute things to me like this, so that was definitely not something that I thought of either. It got to the point over the course of the next maybe 15 minutes or so where I got so incredibly dizzy that I felt like I was going to pass out. And what was scary about that is that, again, I was home with my 2 young daughters who are under the age of 6. And if I passed out and hit my head, for example, or something truly scary started happening, they aren't able to call 911 and help. So I called my younger brother who lives maybe 20 minutes away from me, and I just said, hey, it's probably nothing. I mean, who knows? I can't explain what's happening to me right now, but could you come over here? Can you just come and sit with me just in case? You're probably going to come here for 2 hours. It's going to be nothing. It's going to pass, and we're all going to feel foolish. But could you come here just in case? Over the course of the next 25 to 30 minutes, when he was packing up his stuff and coming to my house and just driving to my house, it got to the point where I was starting to fade in and out of consciousness. I was realizing I'd put a movie on for my daughters, and I was realizing that I couldn't track what was happening in the movie. I had to sit down. I couldn't walk very well. I was really feeling like I was gripping reality just to stay awake. Now, in my day job, I had worked on a project, just very coincidentally, with a company called Cardia Mobile. I'm calling them out right now because I owe them a huge debt of gratitude. I worked with this company called Cardia Mobile, and what they make is this little device that can take an EKG reading of your heart using your iPhone. and a Bluetooth to this little device. I noticed that my heart was pounding and I was starting to really feel dizzy. And I remembered this device, and so I went and got it. And I took both my blood pressure and an EKG reading on this device. My blood pressure was higher than I've ever seen it before in my life. And this device was registering that I was tachycardic, which just means fast. I didn't know whether my heart rhythm was normal or not, but I knew that it was exceedingly fast. Think in the upper 150s, and I had been sitting down. I wasn't doing anything. My brother arrived, and after I had taken this EKG and realized that I was tachycardic, and I immediately sat down on the ground because I was afraid I was going to pass out and hurt myself. I laid down, and over the course of the next hour and a half, I probably passed out, I don't even know, 100 times, just over and over and over and over. My brother, sorry guys, this is really hard. My brother ended up calling my husband in the ER against my will and explained to him what was going on. And I wasn't even able to talk to my husband on the phone. I couldn't put a sentence together. I couldn't remember what I was saying between one word and the next. I was passing out just minute to minute. I couldn't keep track of my own thoughts. It was at that point in time that my husband told my brother, call 911, we need an ambulance. So my brother called the paramedics and he asked me, hey, what is your address? And I couldn't tell him. I didn't know. Ultimately, the paramedics got there. They were incredible. High five to the paramedics in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. You are incredible. They immediately got there, hooked me up to an EKG, found out that, yes, I was tachycardic, but it was a normal rhythm, which meant I was not having a heart attack. But right before the paramedics got there, I was afraid because my daughters were home, right? I was afraid that they would see what was happening and be really scared and not understand what was happening. So as I mustered up enough energy to stay conscious, I called my daughters over and I said, hey, ladies, this is what's going to happen. Mom's not feeling well, and some doctors are going to come to the house to make sure I'm okay. So when you see people come into the house, it's just these doctors that are going to help me make sure that I'm okay. And I told them both I love them. And in that moment, I wondered if I had told my daughters that I love them for the last time. I truly wondered whether I was having a heart attack and whether I wasn't going to be okay, or whether it was something other than a heart attack, because I had never felt like that before. It was hands down the scariest moment of my life. It was amazing when the paramedics came and they were able to tell me, this is not a heart attack, this isn't what you have. Shortly after that, my husband came home. He took me to the emergency department. They tested me for all types of things, blood clots and, more tests to make sure that I hadn't had a heart attack earlier in the day. I had taken numerous EKGs. They all looked terrible. They gave me fluids. The end of the story is they weren't able to tell me what ultimately made me feel that way, but it went on for about 4.5 hours. So what they were able to say is, we don't think it's a panic attack because it lasted hours longer than it should have. We don't know what caused it, but what we do know is that it is not a heart attack. It is not a blood clot. The scary stuff is not, that we would normally worry about, is not what's happening to you. I went home that evening. I spent the next couple of days recuperating, and that is the end of the crisis situation that happened. Now, here's what I want to point out. There was nothing that I could do about that crisis situation itself. It was a set of circumstances that I was being handed. But as I reflected back, and even in the moments while it was happening, I have never been more grateful for doing the work that I advocate that you guys do. When Ashley and I say that we do the exercises we tell you guys, we're not making it up. I practice this stuff on a daily basis, and I have never been more grateful in my life. And for the remainder of this episode, I want to talk about some very specific ways that psych strength played into how that situation played out and also what happened in the days and weeks afterward. So before we dive in there, I want you to think about that. I want you to think about a health situation happening to you and having to confront the reality that something really bad could be happening right now. That could be fatal. I didn't know. So just put yourself in that position as we talk about a few of these pieces where psych strength came into play. The first place that I want to call out is something that happened while I was at the worst of the worst. My heart was racing. I was pretty sure I was having a heart attack. The paramedics had been called. They were coming to my house, and I knew that my kids were going to see this all happening. After I told my kids that I loved them and I was worried that I wouldn't see them again, my mind went crazy, like anyone's would. I started immediately having all of these automatic thoughts like, oh my God, you're never going to see them again. This is so scary. This is so horrible. What if you just told them you love them for the last time? Like, oh my gosh. And I've never been more grateful for the meditation that I do every single morning, where I become an observer of my thoughts, where I take a separate position to the automatic train of thoughts that happen in my mind, where I separate myself from them, where I learn using Steve Hayes' wording, where I unhook myself from my own thoughts and observe my thoughts. I'm not kidding you. It was as though muscle memory kicked in that moment. And as my mind was racing and sending me all these thoughts that were so catastrophic in nature, I, the me that is rational and logical, was also there. It was as though I was having a conversation with myself. The thoughts were saying to me, my automatic mind, my subconscious, all of it was saying to me, what if you die? What if you've just said goodbye to your kids or that you love them for the last time? And the calm, deliberate asset in me stepped forward and said, we don't know any of this. We don't know that that's the case. And not a thing about that will help us get out of this situation. I hear you, I see you, and you might be right, but we don't know that yet. What we need to do is concentrate on how we're feeling, be communicative about the symptoms we're having, and breathe. That's your job right now. So it was literally as though the deliberate part of my mind, the part of me that I have control over, was watching my automatic thoughts and saying, I see you. You're not necessarily wrong, but you're also not helpful right now. I'm not telling you that you need to go away or whatever, but we have a more intentional job that we need to do right now, and that is breathe, and that is communicate. The reason why I was able to do that, I have never been more grateful about having a mindfulness practice. I've been doing it literally every day for more than 18 months now, probably closer to 2 years. I've never been more grateful than that moment, because all of that practice kicked in and I was like, no, we don't hook onto our thoughts. We stand apart from our thoughts. We get a little distance from them. We look directly at them. We don't ignore them. But we make intentional decisions about how we want to move forward. Practice mindfulness. Meditate. Do it every day, even if you hate it. Do it every single day. Because I'm telling you, in the middle of a crisis, I had a calm center to my mind. It was so valuable, and I've never been more grateful for that. The other piece that I want to say about that same situation is our mind plays reliable tricks on us. It has a set of habits. We talk about this as being the committee. It has a predictable set of habits that it relies on to try to keep us safe. One of them is predicting the future. Another one is catastrophizing. You can hear it in what my mind was automatically doing during that time. It was catastrophizing and saying, oh my gosh, you aren't going to see your kids again. Oh my gosh, this is so horrible, on and on. The more you can get yourself familiar with what those thought patterns are, and go back to the episodes where we talk about the committee. Familiarize yourself with them so that you can recognize them in a moment's notice and say, no, that is catastrophizing. You don't know that it's going to be that bad. It might be, but you don't know that. That is predicting the future. You don't know that any more than I do. That is an unknowable thing. So yes, we will acknowledge that that is one possibility among many, and we don't know the outcome. That bit of distance, that tiny bit of optimism in an extremely scary situation, the scariest moment of my life, that's what got me through that moment with some rationality. I had a calm center because of my mindfulness practice and because I've gotten used to identifying those thoughts, those committee members. Get good at them, get to know them. Don't ignore them. Don't ignore that inner critic. Don't ignore that Debbie Downer. Don't ignore that catastrophizer. Don't ignore any of those people that are those automatic thoughts in your mind. Don't ignore them. Get to know them intimately. It's the know thine enemy, right? Get to the point where you can recognize them quickly, because then you can distance yourself from them. You can put some psychological distance between you and them, and you don't get hooked and pulled down by them. This is everything that we're talking about when we say you are not your mind. You are not your mind. Your mind generates thoughts. You are the deliberate part that is an observer of those thoughts. Practice mindfulness. Get to know your mind's natural habits. That's the couple of pieces that I want to focus on during that catastrophe. The things that happened in the days and weeks afterward, though, are equally important. One of the first things that happened to me is, the incident itself happened on a Thursday. That Saturday, so 2 days later, my husband, myself, and my 2 kids walked down to our local farmers market. I've talked a bit about, especially in life design episodes, about the importance of contemplating your own mortality. I felt like I was face to face with my own that night. I truly did. And part of me on that Saturday morning, I took a moment as we were walking to the farmer's market, just laughing and walking along the trail and having a good time, to think about what that day would look like if I wasn't there. How different would my husband's just day be? What would my kids have felt? How would that have looked if I wasn't there? And the gratitude that washed over me in that moment is indescribable. I've never been more grateful to have such a normal, everyday experience as taking a walk with my kids. I've never been more mindful about the moment-to-moment experience that I was having as I was in that moment. Contemplating my own mortality is something that I do, again, often. And I don't think it's unrelated that that's where my mind went 2 days after this event. I truly thought about what would they have been doing today if that would have gone in a different direction. And how grateful am I to be here? And instead of ignoring it and saying, no, that didn't happen, and pushing it away, I marinated in it for a minute. And how grateful I was to be there. That feeling hasn't gone away. There have been pivotal moments in my life and in all of ours where there was our life before that moment and our life after. The moment was just a pivot point. That moment was just snapped in time. That's one of those for me. I will be eternally grateful to be here after experiencing what I did. And it was the contemplation of my own mortality, the practice of it, outside of a crisis situation, that allowed me to use it as a tool to cultivate so much gratitude and so much mindfulness for being there on such a normal, average day. And the last thing that I want to point out, so think about your life. Think about how short and finite and unpredictable it is. You're not guaranteed anything. You're not guaranteed tomorrow. I was afraid I wasn't going to get another day. Be grateful. Be present. Go after the things you care about. Don't worry so much about what other people think. This is your life. Go back and listen to the episodes where we talk about principles of life design. You are at the center of your life. Design it accordingly and be grateful. Even if there are things you're working toward, even if there are things that you want to be different, you're here. If you are breathing, there is opportunity left. And so contemplate that and allow it to let you feel grateful, even in moments when you're absolutely terrified. The last piece that I want to hit on now, having said that, is an awareness of our own needs. I found myself feeling compelled to want to talk through that situation, end to end in detail. As a psychologist, I was aware of the fact that trauma like that can cause PTSD. It can cause a lot of fear and anxiety going forward. So what I was kind of watching for in myself, and I would encourage you to do the same when you encounter difficult situations, whether they are acutely difficult, like really severe and they happened all at once, or whether they are chronically difficult and they're happening maybe less severely but over an extended period of time, or a combination of the two. Pay attention to yourself. Pay attention to the urges that you're feeling, your reactions. What I was looking for was a few things. One, I was looking for how I reacted emotionally and cognitively in situations that started to mimic what happened to me that night. The next time I worked out and had a really elevated heart rate, how did I do? The next time that I was home with my kids when my husband was working a shift in the emergency department, how did I feel? Was I afraid? Did I feel triggered? Did I feel calm? How was I feeling? I was watching for signs of looming, or I guess lagging trauma. I was watching for signs that maybe I need to seek out help or process this differently. I wasn't waiting for it to blow up on me. I was saying, you know what, April, you've been through a thing, and it is absolutely understandable that you might have some emotional something as a result of it. Let's just watch for it. Let's be caring and empathetic to ourselves and watch for it. That wasn't what I noticed. But in watching for that, what I did notice is that I was feeling the need to process the situation. It was as though a big tornado came through and knocked all the boxes and cans and everything off the shelves in my pantry, and it was all sort of laying in a pile. And I felt the need to sort through it, put things back where they belong, organize my thoughts about it. I was feeling the need to process. And so that's what I did. I called up a coach who I work with. I scheduled a session with her, and I said, I need you to hold space for me to process this situation. She asked some insightful questions. It was wonderful. And I feel like I have a better understanding of what that situation was, and more importantly, what I'm going to make it mean going forward. This episode came out of that conversation. This ability to say, I went through a really hard thing. I struggled in the same way that other people struggle, but luckily, I have this set of skills that I've been working on, and you can have them too. You can work on these same things, cultivate the same level of strength so that it's there for you in reserve when you need it during a crisis. This episode came out of that conversation. So the last thing I want you to be aware of is just be a keen, empathetic observer of yourself. Anticipate, what would a normal human being, what might they experience after going through something like this? And let's just be empathetic to ourselves and watch for it. Be our own best advocate and make sure that we get those needs met. You guys, the situation was I've said it so many times, incredibly terrifying. It was really hard. But truly, 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 I look back on it and there's so much value that came from it. That gratitude I experienced hasn't gone away. I feel a renewed sense of, motivation to continue practicing psych strength skills, to continue developing these skills that we share on this podcast. And I felt a responsibility, even though this episode has not been easy to record, a responsibility to share this with you, to say, I'm going through the hard stuff too. I'm doing the same things that you guys are. This stuff has value, and it'll help you get through some of the most difficult times if you practice. It takes practice, and it's worth it. If you're still with me in this episode, thank you for being here. Please know that I am so grateful for this community. This podcast is one of the reasons why I practice the things that I do. It reminds me each and every week that this stuff is important and that there's a community of you out there who are practicing right along with me. To say I love you guys is just such an understatement. I love this community more than I can describe, and I'm so grateful for you all. If you are in crisis right now, or if you find yourself in one in the future, know that I'm here with you and that you can rely on these skills and these techniques to help you get through it and to help you thrive. It's a simple fact that nearly everyone in the world could benefit from building psychological strength, but not everyone will put in the time and effort to do so. But today you did. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Building Psychological Strength. Now, if you're interested in building the mental toughness, confidence, and resilience you need to thrive through life's ups and downs, visit us at www.peakmindpsychology.com. Also, if there's someone in your life who could benefit from this episode, please share it with them. And if you yourself found this episode valuable, meaning if you took away even one insight that you can use to build psychological strength in your own life, we would so appreciate it if you would drop us a rating and a review on iTunes. The thing is, the more ratings and reviews we have, the easier it is to get this powerful and important content out to the people who need to hear it. Remember, your mind can be your most valuable asset or your biggest liability, and you get to choose. So choose wisely, my friend. And I'll see you next time on Building Psychological Strength.